Americans have become very psychologically interested and sophisticated in understanding how we work, how we became the way we became, and how we can evolve and grow to become better and wiser people than we have been. There are, in America, probably about 500 different schools of psychotherapy practice in the United States. When you look at all of those, you can really compress them into more where they put their focus. I remember way back when I went through graduate school, one of the things they required that you do was to create your own model for psychotherapy. And mine was one that really made an effort to try to incorporate the different clusters of schools of psychology, where they put their focus, to try to weave everything together into one continuous integrated process. So by having one continuous integrated process, you really are able to fully appreciate how these problems evolve, all the different factors that play into them, and then ultimately what we can do to help people to get better. And there are, thousands of different scenarios as to who we are and how we develop, but I'm going to choose one which is the one that most people know the most about, are very familiar with, because that lets us move quickly through this and make it make a lot of sense. So I'm going to take the example of the real classic one about daughters of alcoholics. The daughter of a male alcoholic is more than 4 times greater chance of her then marrying someone with an addiction problem than another female. And that's kind of amazing. And so understanding why that happens not only helps us to understand them, but understand why it is that we create the situations we do for ourselves in our lives in the many different ways that we live. We're also going to do a number of different real in-depth courses on this, targeted at different particular kind of problem areas. So we're going to start with this one. We're going to start with talking about the alcoholic home, and we have Julie, who is one of my interns, and she is going to be our scribe so that y'all can actually read what we're writing. And so we're going to start with, we're going to start over here, we're going to talk about our developmental environment. And in developmental environment, we say is that first 18, 20 years of life where we're designed evolutionarily to develop everything we are, develop our whole programming for life through those years. And so what happens in those years is really critical. And so that's why we want to look at that first, is where did this program come from? So in this case, we're going to say the first thing, we put problems on the left-hand side, solutions on the right-hand side. She's good. You're on the right. You're on the correct side. So she starts on the left-hand side. We're going to say alcoholic father, and then some of the more common kind of things that go with that. We'll say emotionally abusive and neglectful. And then the second one we're going to stress Julie out, trying to remember everything I'm saying. But the next one we'll put is just that mom. We'll talk about mom as being a warm and nurturing person. Okay. There's lots more we could say. There's 1,000 different scenarios, but we'll just stick with that for now for simplicity's sake. So when we're going through those developmental experiences, as I said, everything that happens to us in those years becomes part of us. We're designed to form a whole framework for reality based on those experiences. And so as we move from these developmental experiences, the first thing we go to is we're developing a program off these experiences. And so everything that happens to me in those years becomes part of me. And the way we can describe it in the simplest of terms is that everything happens to me, tells me something about me, it tells me something about people in the world, it tells me something about that relationship with people in the world. And so if we're going to talk about this kind of situation, we're probably a lot of different things you might develop, but probably the most common things, if we talk about concept of self, will be something like basically feeling like I'm not good enough. Probably a lot of different ways we can say that. Not good enough, never good enough, unacceptable, but not good enough is probably a pretty good phrasing for that. The next thing we go to after that is a framework for how I see the world. And again, based on those experiences, how she might see the world would be to think that the world will view me critically. And basically, in essence, they will see me as being not good enough. And then the last one we get to, once we got the I'm not good enough, the world will see me as not good enough, or they'll be critical of me. The next one is what do I learn about how I manage that relationship? The way I'd say is read others carefully and eagerly try to help them to feel better. And you can imagine that playing over in the original scenario she had in childhood. That becomes a hardwired, automatic kind of program of which she's going to run. So once I've had these experiences and I develop a way of thinking and interpreting the world, I have experiences, I interpret them, they then create feelings. Okay? So we have read others carefully and eagerly try to help others. I have experiences, I interpret them. Those thoughts then create feelings. So I have experiences in my developmental years. I develop a way of seeing the world, interpreting myself and the world. From those interpretations come feelings. When I make an interpretation, it creates a feeling. we use that word feelings to describe that more visceral kind of response that goes with a thought. And so when we say, I feel not good enough, then there's an emotion that comes from that. We can say you feel not good enough, or we could say low self-esteem, or we could say feel inadequate. Probably any of those words would fit pretty well, but there's a feeling that goes with that. The next one is I talk about that issue of people will consider me unimportant, or people will be critical of me. Then what I'm going to feel is probably guarded. That's probably a good word, guarded. On guard, anticipating some kind of problem with people. And then the third one is, as I try to read people carefully and try to eagerly try to help others, then what's going to happen is words like, let's say, vigilant, what is it?
Apprehensive.
Apprehensive. There we go. Feel like apprehensive. Apprehensive is good. That's a good one. Okay. Apprehensive. Okay. All right. So I have experiences. I interpret them. Those interpretations create emotions. When we call emotions feelings, what we're saying is that emotions are fundamentally physical things. The thing to recognize is that every emotion at its base is a biochemical process. As soon as I have that emotion, I'm releasing that biochemistry into my system, and after a period of time, I actually change my system. My set points of my biochemistry actually shifts to reflect that emotional state. And so the first thing we get over here when we talk about this guardedness and apprehension is anxiety. Anxiety means I'm afraid I'm not going to quite do it right, things aren't going to work out okay for me, that sort of thing, and the anxiety goes up. And lots of other things we don't have to really list in here, but they can go with anxiety, or things like, fatigue, headaches, sleep problems, stomach problems, eating disorder problems, all those kind of things go with anxiety. After a period of time of trying to be as perfect as you can and realizing I never seem to be able to quite be as good as I feel like I should be, and I feel like people aren't accepting me enough, then what emerges often is depression. And again, we get all kinds of other physiological things that go with this. The key thing to recognize is that as these emotions create that biochemistry then loops back around and makes those emotions deeper and deeper. So one of the simplest ways to look at that one is, we are making chemicals inside ourselves all the time, but a little experiment is, when you're anxious, have a cup of coffee. What happens? It makes it a lot worse. What you're doing is you're dumping the chemistry in. In this case, you're doing it all in your head, okay? So we then go from experiences, I develop a way of seeing the world, that develops feelings, feelings become chemical, and then I spin out a behavioral style which is designed to try to prevent this original wounding experience. And so we would say first that is driven and perfectionistic, trying to be just as perfect as I can to get as many things done just in a just so fashion that I can. The next one we have is, if we think about my relating with people, we'll say submissive, accommodating, because that means if I'm afraid that people aren't accepting me well, I'm not going to make waves anywhere. I'm just going to try to smooth things over and make things comfortable with people. And the last one is, if we talk about my relating with people, we'll say what I like to say is an over-eager people pleaser. Now, one of the key principles of existence, and certainly a key principle of this whole concept, is when I first set this up, it wasn't in a loop, but I only later realized that this is kind of a feedback loop, that from the wounds of early life, I developed beliefs, feelings, and actions, all behavioral style, all of which are designed to prevent this original wounding. Okay, she's trying to be as perfect as she can, make everything okay. But the problem is, with her being as perfect as she can and so accommodating and so pleasing, she is much more likely to attract to herself a more self-centered addict. Okay, and so what we wind up with is we can just kind of squeeze that in down here and put a line underneath nurturing person, and then we just have what we get right that comes after that is self-centered addict. Okay, and that doesn't mean all addicts are self-centered, but the dynamic here kind of unfolds that way. Now, the last thing in the world she meant to do was this. Okay, however, that's a formula, and the thing is that formula doesn't just exist for this person. It exists for all of us in some form or another. The basic principle is the unresolved wounds and fears of childhood cause us to, ironically, quite unintentionally, recreate the very things we're trying to avoid in our adult lives. That is one of the real secrets of the universe, and that's pretty much a lot of what brings people to my door. And we're going to follow up on this with the solutions. What do we do about this? And then we're also going to have a lot of different presentations that are really on a much deeper course level that will really get into specific kind of problems people have and what we can do to resolve them.